माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. जय राधा गोपीनाथ राधा गोपीनाथ श्री राधे जय जगन्नाथ जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा जय सुभद्रमाई जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टधर सत शिष्य मंदिर डिवाइन ग्रेस बाय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि बोल ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमा श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकी नंदनाय च नंदगोपकुमाराय Govindaya Namo Namaha. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, Chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, text number 12. Tasyagni-rasya nirbinnam Tasyagni-rasya nirbinnam Lokapalo vishatpadam Lokapalo vishatpadam Vacha swamsena vaktavyam Vacha swamsena vaktavyam Yayaso patipadyate Yayaso patipadyate Tasyagni-rasyam nirbinnam Lokapalo vishatpadam Vacha swamsena vaktavyam Yayaso patipadyate Tasyagni-rasya nirbinnam Lokapalo vishatpadam Vacha swamsena vaktavyam Yayaso patipadyate Tasyagni-rasya nirbinnam Lokapalo vishatpadam Yayaso patipadyate Tasyagni-rasya nirbinnam Lokapalo vishatpadam Vacha swam sena vaktavyam yaso patipadyate. Word for word, tasya, his, agnihi, fire, asyam, mouth, nirbinam, thus separated, lokapalaha, the directors of material affairs, avishat, entered, padam, respective positions, vacha, by words, swamsena, by one's own part, vaktavyam, speeches, yaya, by which, aso, they, patipadyate, express. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Chandaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: Agni or heat separated from his mouth, and all the directors of material affairs entered into it in their respective positions. By that energy, the living entity expresses himself in words. Purport: the mouth of the gigantic universal form of the Lord is the source of the speaking power. The director of the fire element is the controlling deity, or the Adi Deva. The speeches delivered are the Adhyatma, or bodily functions, and the subject matter of the speeches is material productions, or the Adibhuta principle. So we'll continue reading until we get to the next purport. Text 13. When the palate of the gigantic form was separately manifested, Varuna, the director of air in the planetary systems, entered therein, and thus the living entity has the facility to taste everything with his tongue. Text number 14. When the Lord's two nostrils separately manifested themselves, the dual Aswini Kumaras entered them in their proper positions, and thus because of this, the living entities can smell the aromas of everything. Text 15. Thereafter the two eyes of the gigantic form of the Lord were separately manifested. The sun, the director of light, entered them with the partial representation of eyesight. And thus the living entities can have vision of forms. Text 16. When there was a manifestation of skin separated from the gigantic form, Anila, the deity directing the wind, entered with partial touch, and thus the living entities can realize tactile knowledge. 17. When the ears of the gigantic form became manifested, all the controlling deities of the directions entered into them with the hearing principles by which all the living entities hear and take advantage of sound. Purport: the ear is the most important instrument in the body of the living entity. Sound is the most important medium for carrying the message of distant and unknown things. The perfection of all sound or knowledge enters through the ear and makes one's life perfect. The entire Vedic system of knowledge is received by oral reception only, and thus sound is the most important source of knowledge. We'll read again today's verse on the board. 12's translation is: Agni or heat separated from his mouth, and all the directors of material affairs entered into it in their respective positions. By that energy, the living entity expresses himself in words. Om Jnanatimmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Okay, so we're continuing with the manifestation of the Virat Rupa or Vishwarupa of the Lord after the demigods prayed for the Lord to give them the understanding on how they can perform their functions within the universe. So this whole section of Srimad Bhagavatam, very detailed instructions, or rather descriptions of how everything works under the guidance or by the will of the Lord. Nothing happens without His personal touch. Now, this particular section of the chapter talks about how, because the Virat Rupa desired to see, or desired to taste, or desired to hear, desired to speak, therefore all the living entities got those functions. This point has already been mentioned a few times in the previous classes. But the whole crux of the matter is that the dependence on the Supreme Personality of God is there. Nothing happens without the supreme will of the Lord. But at the same time, the Lord is so kind that He facilitates the living entities wanting to enjoy this material world, separate from Him. Although it's not possible, it's an illusory affair, still the Lord sets up this world in such a way that the living entity can perform their desires. Because He values and He appreciates the free will of the living entity. Because the reciprocation of the Lord with the devotee is out of love. Or rather, the living entity and the Lord is out of love. Nitya Krishna Das. To become servant means to accept the master. There is no such thing as being a servant and trying to rebel against the master. And that's a free will, that's a choice. And the living entity must make that choice out of their own accord. So the Lord does not tamper or interfere with the living entity's free will. And so just as the Lord has His own abode and His own enjoyment, similarly the living entities also want to enjoy. And their fallacious understanding is that the Lord has His internal potency to enjoy, and therefore we'll have this external potency of the Lord to enjoy. So the Lord can keep His own internal energy and joy, and He's enjoying perfectly, so we'll also have the external energy and joy. And in that way the living entity tries to usurp or take the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada often says so many times, Krishna is so kind that if the living entity has even a small bit of desire, He'll satisfy that desire. And that's Krishna's kindness, because He can choose to do it or choose not to do it. In a previous verse in a couple of classes before, Prabhupada says the Lord enters into the material world, but He's not affected by it. And that's His prerogative. That's His special privilege. That's His desire. That's based on what He wants. In the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada writes in his preface, I think. In the preface he writes that Krishna wants all living entities to serve Him, and He demands it. He demands it. He wants all living entities to serve His senses, and He demands it. But at the same time, although He demands it, still the magnanimity of Krishna is that He allows the living entities to roam in the material universe, to exhaust their so-called desires to enjoy the material nature. So the Lord has to go through all of this. For the Lord, He's Atmarama, yeah. So He's Atmarama, that He's completely self-satisfied. There's nothing beyond Him that needs to enjoy. Everything is there. Everything is carried out by His functions, and there's nothing beyond Him that He needs to enjoy. In that sense, the Lord possesses everything, and everything is the Lord. But when we say everything is the Lord, in the sense that everything is maintained and rests upon the Lord, coming from the Lord, but it's not that it is non-different from the Lord in the sense of quantity. That material nature cannot perform the functions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just as the cow and the milk is the separated energy of the cow. It comes from the cow, so in one sense it is the cow. But the functions of milk is totally different to the cow. Whereas in the case of Krishna, Krishna can perform the functions of material nature without His energy. He's omnipotent. He can do that. But He still does it through His energy. So He's in that sense separated. He's completely different or non-dependent on His energy, but still He engages His energy in that way. That's His prerogative. That's His His being the supreme independent, the sarva karana karanam. Now, Today's purport proper talks about the Adi Deva, Adi Atma and Adi Bhuta, and this again has been touched upon by previous speakers before. And this Adi Deva, Adi Atma and Adi Bhuta principle can be applied in different spheres of understanding. So we can understand these principles in the terms of the klesha, or the miseries of material existence. We can understand these three principles in the sphere of consciousness that we previously discussed a couple of classes ago. Prabhupada talks about the Adi-atmika self-identification, being identification with the body and the mind, Adi-bhautika, or the self-identification with the material products, and Adi-devika, the self-identification as servant of the Lord. So these three principles can be applied in different places, just as Mahaprabhu has given us the Sambandha, Abhideya and Prayojana principles, that the understanding of the field, the process and understanding of the goal or the result of one's sadhya, sadhana, which is the sadhya. Now, in this context, Adi Atma refers to the bodily functions. Adi Deva is the deity in control. So that's in this verse, Agni is the deity in control of the mouth. The speech, or the tanmatra, the subtle organ, is the Adhyatma, and the subject matter, so in other words the speech itself and the words that come, that is the Adibhuta principle. So you'll see that this particular principle applied to all of the five knowledge acquiring senses, because the working senses don't have tanmatra. They don't deal in that sense. Okay? So just like the eyes have there's the eyesight, there's the organ of the eye, and then there's the object. So Bhagavad Subodhini says that this tanmatra doesn't exist, or the subtle sense organ doesn't exist for the five working senses. Because they don't come in context per se. They are just function. They perform the work. So the Lord, did we discuss it today? No, we went up to the ears today. Okay, so we're dealing with the knowledge acquiring senses. The Lord desired to taste, and then comes the palate or the tongue, and Varuna, the director of the waters, and he provides a facility to taste everything with the tongue. And then you have the nose, the Ashwini Kumaras, and the propensity to smell, and then the objects or the aromas. And then you have the eyes of the Lord, and then the director of light, which is the sun, and then you have eyesight, and then the forms. Here we have the skin, which is Anila, the directing deity of the wind. And here he's entered with partial touch, so that the living entities can understand or realize tactile knowledge or the touch sensation. Later on, if you keep reading, it talks about how this, there are two, let's go straight to that purport. Prabhupada talks about it here. It's in text 18, we didn't touch on it today. But it talks about how there are two principal items for sense perception. So just as we talked about the skin and the feeling or the feeling of touch, that is again divided into two. There's the touch and then there's the itching. The touch is the skin and the itching is the hair, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. But it's all presided upon by this one demigod. Okay, rather, the touch is presided by Anila, and the hairs are presided by the deity known as Osadya. In the second canto, Shukadev Goswami mentions how the Virat Rupa, the hairs of the Virat Rupa are the different herbs, plants, trees, Osadya. So that's the tactile knowledge. And then we come to text 8:17, which we stopped reading today, finished on today. Talks about the ears, and then how the Dik Devatas, or the controlling deities of the directions, entered. And this is how the living entities were able to hear, got the option of hearing. And what do they hear? The sound. So Prabhupada mentions in this particular purport that the ears are the most important instrument in the body, because even if the other senses don't work, we can elevate our consciousness simply by hearing. So it's a technical purport. At the same time, it's quite self-explanatory how it works. When I was reading this, I was thinking of how application, what is that we apply from this knowledge or understanding? One is, I mentioned already, that everything happens by the Supreme Personality of Godhead's wish and desire. So He's there present at all times, and you can see His personal touch, that He's always considering the living entities, and He's always thinking of how to satisfy them and how to bring them back. Satisfy their senses not, but how to make them understand that, or satisfy their curiosity with enjoying material nature. To get rid of that desire to enjoy material nature and to become like Him, rather to serve, than to give up that sort of independence and serve Him. So Prabhupada often mentions that when a devotee, a pure devotee surrenders to the Lord, actually they become the supreme independent. Because by the mercy of the Lord, then they're able to perform wonderful feats that are not ordinarily possible when you're governed by material nature. So there's that story of, I think it's Srinivasacharya's disciple. It's mentioned that when he went, I think it's in Puri, when he was preaching in that village, then one particular morning a yogi came into the village, and this yogi started showing magical feats, especially walking on water and different things like that. So then when the villagers who were the disciple of this particular disciple of Srinivasacharya, they went and approached him completely in shock and excitement that Gurudev, there's someone who's come and he's performing these magic feats by walking on water and everything. And so then this Acharya said that, don't worry, just chant Hare Krishna, it's nothing important. And so again another batch came, and again he said the same thing, this is insignificant, don't worry about it, just chant Hare Krishna. And at that time this particular Acharya was brushing his teeth with a particular twig of a neem tree. So he was just brushing his teeth. And so again another batch of disciples came, and they all approached their spiritual master, and they told him that, look, this yogi has come and is starting to perform magical feats. And then immediately this Acharya, he just simply threw the stick down, stepped on it and started flying throughout the village. A couple of times, did a couple of laps, came back to where he was brushing his teeth, immediately took the brush, started brushing his teeth, and told them, just don't worry about these things, simply just chant Hare Krishna and be happy. So the devotee has all these potencies, but they choose not to show it. Why? Personally, they don't wish to show it because they have no use unless it's engaged in the service of the Lord. They're not exhibitionists like the rest of the conditioned living entities. They don't want to express their Ishvara Bhava. They're just simply here to serve the Lord. If they need to display a certain quality at a certain time for the Lord's pleasure, they'll do it. Like I was reading yesterday, Rameshwar Prabhu, one of Prabhupada's original BBT trustees, he was mentioning how when he approached Srila Prabhupada just to suggest some edits, he mentions that Prabhupada displayed his divine anger. Prabhupada smashed the table with his hands and he started roaring very loudly, asking him why he wanted to edit Prabhupada's books. And so it's mentioned, Rameshwar Prabhu said, this is a display of Prabhupada's transcendental anger. Because many instances you'll see, Prabhupada will display anger, but he'll never be affected by it. Like Bhakti Charan Maharaj, he gives this very amazing story of in one particular European country, Prabhupada had started a yagya for initiation. And when he arrived there, the TV reporters, everyone was there. It was a public event and his disciples were there. And so when he came, like the whole yagya was a mess. Mess in the sense it was not even set up properly. So Prabhupada he was asking slowly, patiently asking, you need to bring this, you need to do that, where are the fruits? And so these disciples immediately went and got the fruits and came, and they brought cut fruits for Prabhupada, like they did here in Sydney actually. They did the same thing. Prabhupada said, where's the fruits? And disciples said, oh, Prabhupada must be hungry, like that. So they go and they cut the fruits and bring it to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, what will I do with this? Because you need whole fruits for the yagya. Anyway, the disciples, one blunder after the other being recorded on television program. Prabhupada's correcting them. And Prabhupada's starting to show divine anger because these people, or these devotees, they have taken it lightly. So they need to be put into place and more gravity needs to be shown to follow. And so Prabhupada says, yelling disciples, doing this, doing that, get this, get that. And in the crowd, there happened to be a hippie. And this particular hippie just started practicing Krishna consciousness. He was slowly, he's, Shraddha Ada Sadhu Ata Sadhu Sangha. Adavu Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangha. So he's starting to practice association with the devotees. And for him, his understanding is that, whenever someone displays some mundane qualities, the devotee started telling him, just chant Hare Krishna. Don't be angry, just chant Hare Krishna. And so this hippie, he's a new guy, he doesn't know the etiquette or anything. He sees Prabhupada very angry, and then he says, Srila Prabhupada, you should just chant Hare Krishna. And Prabhupada looked at him, and what did Prabhupada do? Prabhupada didn't just, go off at him. Prabhupada didn't feel any sort of negative emotion. Prabhupada just put his hand in his bead bag and started chanting. And Bhaktichara Maharaj was explaining that this is the humility of Prabhupada. Prabhupada knew when to use anger, when not to use anger, and at the same time he knew his position. So the devotee knows how to use their senses for the pleasure of the sense proprietor, Krishna. See, Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, Shuhidam Sarva Bhutanam, Nyatva Mam Shantam Richati. That actually Krishna is the supreme proprietor, enjoyer, and beneficiary of all yagyas. And what is yagya? When we sacrifice, when we perform the sacrifice. And fourth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it's mentioned that one can perform, the brahmacharis perform their yagya or offering of sacrifice into the ears, fire of hearing, and the householders in their works, I believe, right? In the objects of the senses. So there you can see that they're offering their senses, the objects of their senses, to Krishna. Yad karosi yad asnasi yad juhosi dadasi yad tapasyasi kauntaya mat kurusvama tadarpanam. That you're offering everything to Krishna because he's the supreme beneficiary. So everything is meant for Krishna's pleasure. So coming back to the point, so that these manifestations, the devotees are supremely independent. They can perform many magical feats, and as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the less intelligent will then take that as a norm. When they see a acharya or a self-realized soul empowered by the Lord perform a magical feat, or not magical, but a uncommon activity which only the Supreme Personality of Godhead would show to the fullest extent. Being empowered by the Lord, the devotee may perform such an activity, but then in unscrupulous persons of less intelligence will then take that as a norm and try to practice that particular activity. And therefore you have upper sampradayas. So the devotees of the Lord are there being the supreme independent, but the underlying principle is that everyone is dependent on the Lord. We are Prakriti and He is the Supreme Purusha. He is the supreme proprietor and the supreme controller of everything, and therefore everything must be engaged in His service, which is the crux or the sum and substance of our understanding of Krishna consciousness. When we understand that we are a servant of the Lord, everything must be used and engaged in the service of the Lord for His pleasure. Now, when I was thinking about this point, it also reminded me of an instance where a devotee also identified himself with the Lord and started controlling the functions of the universe that way. Can you think of a particular devotee who did that? Dhruva Maharaj. So when Dhruva Maharaj initially, he approached his mother out of anger, having been slighted by Suruchi, his stepmother. His mood was of complete anger, complete bodily attachment and identification. Then he met Narad Muni, and by Narad Muni's mercy, by practicing exactly what Narad Muni said, Kaumara Acharat Pragno Dharman Bhagavatan Iha, that he followed exactly what Narad Muni had given him, and following that to such an extent, it's mentioned that he identified himself with the Supreme. And Prabhupada clarifies, saying that actually it's not that he thought himself to be supreme. He understood his position as the supreme, as the individual servant of the Lord, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's mentioned that his consciousness was one with the Lord. And we read that in the previous purport also, that the Adi Atmic self-identification means, or the Adi Devik rather, self-identification means that you identify yourself as the servant of the Lord. this one consciousness. Remember we read before, the Lord is represented by 1, 3 and 10. That one is being one in consciousness with the Lord. In other words, being fully dovetailed in the service of the Lord. Whatever the Lord wants, that's the same desire the living entity has. Dovetailed desire. So Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj came to such a pure state of consciousness that he was identifying in that way with the Lord. His desires were completely dovetailed with the service of the Lord. What does it mean his desires were completely dovetailed with the Lord? It's like this, many people have experience of this. When one spiritual master comes to visit, then that particular period of time, the consciousness of the disciple is completely, what does my spiritual master want, or what needs to be carried out? To the extent that sometimes eating and sleeping becomes irregular. The consciousness simply becomes, okay, what is the next program of my spiritual master? What does he want me to do now? When can I finish my rounds? Everything becomes completely focused on the spiritual master. But if you think about it more deeply, can you sustain that consciousness if the spiritual master is with you all the time? To the extent we're able to serve the spiritual master, like I remember when I came to Krishna consciousness, I was practicing and I met devotees. And I remember there was the first Vyasa Puja I attended was of Jayapataka Maharaj's. And Jayapataka Maharaj's Vyasa Puja, it was like amazing, because you come to Krishna consciousness first time and you're like, whoa, what's all of this? In prasad and so many devotees, and it's like a big festival. So then I remember sitting down and inquiring about the devotees, about the glories of Maharaj. And quite interestingly, they talked very common point was how Maharaj was very tireless and selfless in his service. They were explaining to me how Maharaj would travel from one country to the other, and he wouldn't take much rest. Even recently, I think Sankirtan Narottam Prabhu was explaining to me that Maharaj wouldn't take rest much. Whenever he got an opportunity to close his eyes, he would close and then he'd open and then he'd immediately go to the next program, next place, next city, next country. He would immediately travel, just travel and travel and travel. And he was mentioning that the disciples, when I first came to Krishna consciousness, they were explaining to me that one particular servant, he was there explaining, he was saying that when he was in South America, I think it was, God, I can't believe I forgot his name. No, Prabhu, that amazing chef. Jitendriya Prabhu, Jitendriya Gaur Prabhu. How can I forget? Yeah, when Jitendriya Prabhu was explaining, when he was traveling through South America, he was mentioning how he was going, he didn't get to sleep for 7 days. He was just traveling and traveling consistently with his spiritual master. To the extent that he would go from one side of the country to the other country and then to the next country. And he served so much that he, I think it was not 7 days, a couple of days without sleep. And it's mentioned the next, then his Guru Maharaj relieved him and Maharaj went to the next country. And he was mentioned that he just slept. The whole day he just slept. He had to recover. Somehow or other the body he couldn't maintain. So, how much are we dovetailing our senses to the service of the Lord is like going close to fire. How much we can throw ourselves into the fire of devotional service without thinking of our own desires, without thinking of satisfying our own senses. It's a good way to gauge. Because if the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared before us, then we would just simply look at Him and He would look at us. And then we'd serve Him. We'd say some prayers, whatever, a couple of slokas, 2, 3 here and there. And the rest would just be like gobsmacked. How come the Supreme Personality of God is here? And that's it. What more would we do? So seeing Krishna means to serve Krishna. Because if the Lord appeared, and He is appearing right in front of us here, we come, we pay obeisances, whatever we have to a certain extent of our possession, we offer to the Lord, flowers, fruits, money, whatever we have, pray to the Lord, and then we leave. Do some service around the temple to a certain extent, and then we go. But the pure devotees of the Lord, they're able to stay in the association of the Lord constantly because they're in that mood of service to the Lord. What's next? How can I serve the Lord next? Next, what's next? But when we desire that sort of retirement, that policy of now let me just take a break and relax. Then we can understand we're not really up to the stage of purity, of pure devotional service. Because the nature of pure devotional service is uninterrupted. It is uninterrupted, it goes on. And it is without any ulterior motive. That is pure devotional service. And it's that devotional service that will purify the soul. So therefore we always talk about association with the pure devotees. Because if we're in the association of the pure devotees, we have to become forced to follow in what they're doing, in serving. In fact, the pure devotees are so expert, they won't let you go. They'll also engage you in the service of the Lord because they're very expert. If they're expert to be able to engage the energy of the Lord in the Lord's service, what's the difficulty if it's external energy or marginal energy? They know how to engage the devotees in the Lord's service. So the Lord's devotees are supremely independent because they take shelter of the Lord and their senses are simply dovetailed to the Lord's service. So what can we apply in our daily life, this particular principle? That every function or activity we perform, we should always remember the Lord. Even if it means we can't remember before the activity, which is ideal, during the activity, which is okay, next better, at least at the end of activity we should remember the Lord. And we're very expert in that because when the results are very bad, we'll remember the Lord. But when the results are good, then we just forget the Lord. So at least we should try and work to trying to remember the Lord. If something good comes, Prabhupada has taught us, he explains in Bhagavad Gita, when something has good come, the devotee doesn't become elated. Rather, the devotee thanks the Lord that, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to serve you. If something bad comes, then the devotee thinks that I've done something in the past and my Lord, you're so kind that you've reduced the actual reaction of that result or that action. And the result is very minuscule. Like we often say, if you get a cut on the finger, maybe you should have got your head cut off. But the Lord has reduced it to just the finger, right? So the mood should always come into our devotional service that actually the Lord is the controller, the Lord is the master. Actually, it is by His mercy that we are performing these activities. Because He desired it, we are able to do it. The Virat Rupa. The Virat Rupa desired to see, therefore we can see. So Prabhupada will often say, what can you actually see? Remove the light, there's darkness. What can you see? Therefore Prabhupada often mentions and often emphasizes on hearing. Hearing is such an important thing. Because unfortunately, being dependent on these blunt senses, we cannot understand Krishna. So when we perform activities and we're just absorbed in the blunt senses, that this is my hand, the hand is going to grab this, it's going to pick up this juice and it's going to drink the juice, it's going to satisfy my tongue and then it's going to satisfy my belly and so on and so forth. Then how can you understand Krishna? If it's just simply the satisfaction of the objects and the senses coming together, which is another mental speculation. So, therefore Narad Muni mentions, Atat Shri Krishna Namadi, Na Bhavet Grahayam Indriye, Sevan Mukhi Hi Jivado, Swayameva Spuratyada. In this verse, it's mentioned that by engaging the tongue in the service to the Lord, one will be able to immediately understand the Lord. Because by engaging the blunt senses and trying to understand the Lord is not possible. Rather, engage the tongue in the service of the Lord. Like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur often mentions, don't try to see the Lord. Act in such a way the Lord will be pleased to see you. So we perform our functions of our senses to please the Lord so that He may become visible to us. Right? Jagannath Swami, Nayana Patagami Pavatame. That's the mood or the goal, that if you're pleased with my service, please appear before me so that I may always remember you and never forget you. So hearing is such an important thing because with the tongue we taste, but we also vibrate the holy name of the Lord. And we receive that vibration through the ear. And it's such an important function because one of the basic understandings of Krishna consciousness is that of the senses, the sound, the ear is most important because, take for example, I bring towards you a cup of a white liquid. And we engage our senses in trying to understand. There's another example of how you have these 5 blind people holding onto an elephant, right? One's holding onto the ears, one's holding onto the trunk, one's holding onto tusk, legs, and then the tail. Right? And each one is saying that, it's the one holding the ears, it feels like a board. Other one's holding the trunk and saying it looks like a hose. Other one's holding the tusk and saying it's something sharp like a horn. Other one, like this. But they're not able to understand it in total, together. They don't understand the whole object. In the same way, if I bring a glass of white liquid to you, if you engage the other senses, it will be an imperfect understanding of that particular liquid. Because I've come to give to you the easiest way and the most comprehensive way to understand what it is simply to ask and hear what it is. Because if you engage your eyes, you can think it's milk, it could be something mixed with water, it could be so many things. Then you can engage your sense of smelling. But the smell doesn't always describe what the actual object is. Same thing with touch. If you were to touch it, what if it's acid? You could harm yourself. And in the same way, tasting. If you taste it and it's poison, you're finished. But each of these senses don't give a complete understanding of the object. They're simply limited. But if you hear, you can get complete understanding. But that hearing, there's a qualification. You need to hear from an authorized source. That is the qualification. You can't just simply hear anything and everything. In this example, you need to hear from the person who's giving you that cup. What is this? Right? And that person you must also trust. You can't just go to everyone, they give you something and you drink it. What is this? Oh, okay, I'll drink it. No, you must trust that person. They need to be authorized. So in the same way, this hearing is the most important instrument of the body. Because it allows us to transcend the bodily platform. It allows us to engage the senses in the Lord's service. Because once we hear of our original nature, the sambandha, then we can understand what is the goal. And then we can perform the activities, the process to reach that goal. Otherwise, we are just simply swallowed up by material nature, simply drowning in material existence. We think we know what we're doing, but we're just coming together like pieces of grass, and then we're separating like pieces of grass. We come together, form family, society, nation, all of these things together, species, and then material nature pulls us apart. And then again you'll take another body of another species, and then one sense will be stronger than the other. It's mentioned in the human form of life, the senses are all potent. Whereas in the other species of life, one sense is more powerful than the other. And that takes the prominence. So then the other senses take a secondary role. But in the human form of life, all the senses are there, available for the living entity to engage. And therefore we engage all of our senses in the service of the Lord. Beginning with the tongue. Why? Because we've heard. Why? Because often when I remember reading this verse, we begin with the tongue. But how do you know to begin with the tongue? Because you heard from that shloka that you should begin with the tongue. So therefore the hearing is also very important there. So when we engage the tongue and the senses in the service of the Lord, we're applying what we're reading in Srimad Bhagavatam. That the Lord is the proprietor and He's given us the senses. And we can't really enjoy with these senses anyway. So therefore we must engage everything in the service of the Lord. Just like we offer worship Ganga Mai, by worshiping Mother Ganga with the water of the Ganga. We offer it back to Mother Ganga. Just as a child will get money from the parents and then offer the gift back to the parents, which ultimately already belongs to the parents. But still, that offering of love, that is the most important aspect. Yes, we're offering, this is the senses, but if we become mechanical, it's no different from the karma kanda principle. Because when it becomes mechanical, I have to do it so I can get the result. If I don't do the activity, I won't get the result. So the consciousness becomes more result-oriented. And then the process becomes mechanical. And as I was mentioning before, then you start remembering the Lord at the result end, rather than in the beginning of the activity. So by practicing or understanding how to dovetail our senses in the service of the Lord, and that begins by hearing from the pure devotees, authorized spiritual master, and by engaging the senses in the Lord, then naturally we'll be able to understand what is peace, what is happiness, how to engage the service of the Lord, and we'll also be able to deliver other living entities as well. So that's pretty much it for this class. The senses are all engaged. The senses mentioned here are all the Gyanendriyas, the knowledge acquiring senses, and their objects, the organ, subtle organ, and also the demigods are being arranged in the Virat Rupa. And in that way we must also engage our senses in the service of the Lord, being grateful that He is allowing us to use these senses. Then gradually become purified so that they all become engaged in the service. Ahoitiki apratihata, yayatma suprasiditi. So we may work towards that goal. Vasudeva Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga. No, that's not the right verse. I can't remember the first two lines. Do you know this one? Ahoituki apatihata, yayatma suprasiditi. Savai pumsam paro dharma, yato bhakti adhokshaje. Ahoituki apatihata, yayatma suprasiditi. Yeah. Thank you. So that's the sum and substance, that we engage the senses in the Lord without any ulterior motive and uninterruptedly, so that we can engage in the service of the Lord continuously, being satisfied in that way. Okay, I'll end here. Any questions, comments? No? Thank you very much for listening. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Nithai Gaur Premanande.